Welcome to Living Western, a show dedicated to telling the real story of the rural American West through individual stories of the amazing people who call this part of the world home. Thank you for joining us for this third and final part of our conversation with J.B. Zielke, author of The Lost Cowboy. Now, I had originally intended for this conversation to be recorded in one long episode. However, the conversation went for over 3 hours, and what we talked about during this conversation was pretty important, I felt. And what I don't want to happen is for the listener to glaze over after the first hour and miss so much important stuff that came in the last 2 hours. So I split it up into 3 episodes, 1 hour each. Most of you will have listened to part 1 and part 2 already, but if you have not, I encourage you to please go back and listen to those first 2 episodes because they do add a lot of context to this final one. Admittedly, we ended the last episode on a bit of a dark note, but we're going to pick it up on a more positive spin in this conversation, and JB's going to tell us about some of the most beautiful country he saw as he was traveling the world as a working cowboy across 6 continents. We're going to talk about the importance of travel for every single person and why it is so needed in order to gain perspective. We're going to talk about different forms of government. We're going to talk about the different perceptions of freedom. We're also going to get into some of JB's adventures, like how he got robbed in Rome. In the last episode, I did mention how I was going to include the bonus material that I had originally intended to cut off of these main episodes. And then people would be able to view the bonus content through something like Patreon, where they'd pay a small fee to be able to see extra behind the scenes type stuff that they wouldn't get on the main episode. However, I think it's important as we're moving forward, if I do get a Patreon built, that in order for you, the listener, to be interested in buying into the Patreon, that you know what it is that you're getting. So I'm going to include the bonus material in this episode. So without further ado, let's get into our final part of this conversation with J.B. Zielke. Talking about these different countries that you've been to, we've talked about some of the scarier parts. What about the beauty? Where would you say, I mean, there's beauty everywhere you go, and the trick is seeing it and being open to it. But from your perspective, where were the most beautiful places in all of your travels so far?
There was, well, I guess, um, there was a place I went to in Mongolia called Orkhon Valley, and it's part of the UNESCO World Heritage Sites. It's a really beautiful valley over there that, and not far away is actually the home of where it was the head of Genghis Khan's empire, and it's kind of crumbled and fallen apart now. It's just an ancient city, but really beautiful country. Big valleys, and the Altai Mountains are right there, which are huge, really pretty mountains. That was a really pretty place. Argentina as a whole was very pretty. The northern parts, I mean, I guess it depends on what you find pretty. But when I was in the north, I was up in a really swampy area, and at night it was terrifying being up there in that, because I've never really lived in a swamp, and there's just monkeys and capybaras and caiman and all kinds of creepy crawly stuff. But during the day, it was really pretty. Those swamps in northern Argentina. Um, Trying to think what else that the part of Australia I was in was pretty flat. It looked a lot like the Serengeti Plains in Africa, where it was just flat with the occasional shrub trees and grassland. So nothing too crazy about Australia. Africa also is very cool, South Africa, because each side of the country has a very different um, atmosphere because or ecosystem, because the tides mixing together, coming off each coastline, and they all come down and meet in Cape Town. But different. I mean, you don't have to drive very far in South Africa to be in an entirely different biome. So I was in Lesotho, which is that's actually a little landlocked country inside South Africa, and that was really beautiful. It's all these big cliffs, and it's up on top of a huge plateau. Very, that's the Drakensberg mountain range. That was beautiful down there in the Drakensberg mountains. But then you go down to Cape Town, and you're right on the ocean, and there's all this fog that rolls in all the time, and um, also kind of big cliff sides that lead right down to the ocean. That was really pretty as well. But I guess I don't have one specific place that I went to that was beautiful. Those are the natural places, natural beauty. Also, I went to Rome, and that was fascinating. Seeing like the layers of lasagna going back in history down into the ground of how many civilizations had been built on top of Rome. So in a more urban way, Rome was very cool.
Your experience traveling to Rome. Tell us a little bit about that. What were you expecting when you went there? And then you talk about it a little bit in your book. What was your feeling when you finally got there?
Yeah, Rome. I was expecting Rome to be this like pristine, beautiful, basically like a giant museum, which in a way it is. Um, it's like a giant museum because everything there is so historical. Um, Everywhere you look, there's really, really interesting, neat things to see. And you could walk down any side street in Rome, walk a couple blocks, and you'll just stroll right into a 1,000-year-old church. And so that was really cool. But I didn't expect Rome. I mean, I think people forget that Rome is a bustling, huge city full of pollution and people and crime. And just like any other city, that's all happening. And I mean, that stuff is happening right next to the Colosseum and the Roman Forum and all these really cool. I mean, you see it on in the movies and stuff, and you just assume that it's all very clean and nice and quiet, and it's not. It's tourists everywhere and city buses, and I actually got robbed right next to the Coliseum. I got up early the very first day that I was there. Got up early to try and beat the crowds to the Coliseum, and I made myself an easy target because I was one of the only people there. And this guy from Senegal came up to me and started showing me all these pictures of his family and telling me stories about her. And at first, I was thinking, oh, what a nice guy. It's cool to meet this guy. And then he he slipped a bracelet onto my wrist, and I said, no, thank you. I could have immediately my spidey senses went off, and I could tell that he was trying to rope me into something. And he slipped a little cheap bracelet on my wrist and tied it really tight fast so I couldn't get it off. And he said, I said, what was that for? And he said, well, it's a gift for you. You don't have to pay me anything for that. And I said, well, I appreciate it, but I know that ain't true. So what's this mean? And he's like, well, I told you about my family, and we any donation you're willing to give me, since I gave you a gift, maybe you can give me a gift. And I pulled a wad of cash, wad of euros out of my pocket. Money is a weird thing, and when you're traveling, because when you're not familiar with like the euro or Canadian dollars or kroners or whatever, if you don't familiarize yourself with the money right away, you kind of need to pull it all out and look at it to see what you're giving people. And I made that mistake with the euro because I had just come from Sweden, where they use kroners, which is a whole different type of money. So I get there and I pull this wad of euros out, and he goes, "Oh, thank you," and grabs the whole wad and just ran off. And there was really nothing I could do to get it back. It wasn't a lot of money. I don't remember exactly how much it was, like $100 worth of cash or something. So not an emergency, but it wasn't fun getting. And I was just looking around at the Coliseum, thinking, well, glad I got to visit this place. Get robbed here, but I still had a lot of
Yeah.
fun in Rome. There was some really cool old historical stuff I got to see.
You brought up the movies, and yeah, everything that I've ever seen about Rome all has some sort of romance to it and beauty, and like you
Hmm.
mentioned, art. You don't really think about what the reality of it is if you've never been there. So, what would be a mountaintop moment? Do you have any sort of like real mountaintop moments? I'll say in your life, not just in the your travels for the book, but what would be something that you look back on your life and it's a high point?
The first one that comes to mind was is when I was in Mongolia. Um, it never really kicked in. It wasn't like I got to Mongolia and went, "Sweet, I did it." There's all six continents, and that never really set in until I was way up in northern Mongolia with these people that ride the last people on Earth that ride reindeer as their main source of transportation, and it was a hard journey to get up there. There's no infrastructure, so we had to take these 4-wheel drive vans for 3 or 4 days on these real rough 2-track roads, and then get on these half wild horses and ride them up into the mountains. And um, once we got up there and we were living with that family, um, they put me on a reindeer for the first time, and I was riding this reindeer around, and I kind of rode off by myself away from the teepees and the folks that own the reindeer and everything. And I was just looking around this big old wide open valley. We were right on the Russian Mongolian border, and that was when it set in for me that was not the end of everything, but the end of the past 5 years of my life. What I'd dedicated all my free time, all my money, all my brain power to this goal of going to all six continents and ranching. And right then, when I was just sitting on a reindeer by myself looking down this great big old valley, and it set in that I had finally done it. And so that was a pretty big mountaintop moment for me. I'm well aware that the journey is the important part of it. There's never really a finish line, or there might be a finish line, but there's nothing special about it. And so I try not to hype myself up too much about accomplishing things like that. But I'm always more focused on having fun along the way than when I get to the end, because I think if you do that, you will surely end up sorely disappointed if you think that just that one um, the end point is going to change everything. If you didn't enjoy it the whole way along, or even if you didn't enjoy it but you valued the trip of getting there, I think that's more important. So I it's almost a bad thing, I think, that I don't look forward to finish lines, but I there's not a lot of those that I've had that I let really get to me.
Well, I can appreciate that, but I really value the fact that you are introspective enough to appreciate those high points when they're happening. And I mean, you wrote a bunch of them in your book. Um, 'Cause those high points, while special to you, um, and this goes for low points too, if you never share that story, nobody can ever learn from it. So I will go with the opposite question now. What would you say are some of the hardest, most difficult moments in your life, and how did you navigate them?
Yeah, the first one of those that I mean, there's been a few of them, but the first one that comes to mind is, and I just briefly touch on it in the book because I feel like it played a part in all this traveling. But um, I at one point I owned a bunch of livestock. Um, After I got back from Argentina, I was like, I had this idea for a little bit that it was time for me to grow up and I needed to get a full-time job. And so I was a ranch manager for about a year. and I I pretty much all had all but given up on continuing to travel, and so I took everything I had. I sold my pickup trucks. I had two diesel pickup trucks and a horse trailer, and I didn't have much, but what I did have, I I cashed out and sold, and I bought. I had this brilliant idea to use goats for prescriptive grazing, and so I bought all these goats, and I was running them while still having my full time ranch manager job or unit manager job, and that whole without giving too many details, that particular company that I worked for, they weren't doing all that well financially, and they had to cut off some of the fat, and I was the fat, and so I got fired from that job, and I didn't see it coming, and it blindsided me. And when that happened, I still had all my money tied up in these animals, but the the animals that I had were kind of running in conjunction with the company I was working for. And so when that happened, they said, not only are you fired, but you need to get all your animals out of here by the end of the week. And I had no, where do you go with 500 goats or whatever? There, I can't remember how many I had, but I didn't know what to do with them. And so I ended up taking them to the sale barn, and I sold them. I think the check that I got for them, I got paid a third of what I bought them for. And then I also had money in pasture and shipping and antibiotics and vaccine, all that stuff. And so basically, I just completely lost my shirt on that deal. And so it was me and I believe my brother was 14 or 15 at that time. And we were living out of a $400 Buick that I bought off of a lady that was down on her luck in town. And that car was just falling apart. It was a complete pile of junk. And it was me and my dog and my saddle. I had two dogs and my little brother and my saddle and everything I owned packed into this junker car. And I didn't know what to do. And I also didn't know what to do with my little brother. And I started drinking a lot. And I, I, I don't smoke cigarettes, but I started smoking cigarettes at that time. And I just was feeling pretty sorry for myself. And for about a month or two. And then that was when I mentioned that my brother said, well, you've ranched on 3 out of 6 continents. Why not go for the other three? It was at that time that he said it, because I think he could see that I was spiraling, and even though he's a little kid, he knew what was going on, and so that kind of pulled me out of it, and it was important because it got me back into traveling. I gave it up at that point, and it turned into a huge adventure, and I'm glad it all happened the way that it did. But it was a tough pill to swallow at the time. It was kind of funny also. My brother, I just had him working for me for the summer, and so when school came back around, I sent him back to my parents, and he we had been homeless for a month or two, living out of a car, living on BLM land when we could, or sleeping on my friends' couches and showering at the hot springs and stuff like that. It was pretty rough, but he went back to school and told his teacher that he had had a great summer and we camped the whole time. And so it was pretty interesting to, it was all about perspective. He thought we were camping, and we were just homeless, living out of my car, doing what we could.
Outlook is a very powerful thing.
Yep, that's right.
What would you say, kind of on this line of thinking, would be most powerful lessons learned in your life that you could share? Maybe somebody could glean some wisdom off of it.
Well, I guess to go along with that story is some of the best things that have ever happened to me in my life have come from really terrible situations. Some of the lowest points I've ever been in, um, they always ended up being a huge shift that was hard at the time, but in retrospect was the right one, and may, I think it was the right thing that needed to happen. And so I think that's something that I constantly remind myself of, even when I have bad days. I mean, if we're talking large scale, there's life changing events that can happen that can really, kick you down to the ground, and it's hard to see the positive in those. But even just having a rough day, you can see that in a rough day. A lot of times the next day is a great one, or the next week is a great one. And so that's something that just over time and through experience that I've learned, and it keeps me from getting too far down when things get rough. Um, Another thing that I try and, I guess, not preach to people, but it worked for me, is that I think there's this huge push in society that you need to have these really specific goals and a plan to get there, step by step plan. And I think for some people that's probably true. So it depends on the way that you think. Personally, that's not really for me. I know a lot of people that if they make a very detailed step by step plan with deadlines and exact values and things associated with it, it works great for them. It doesn't for me. So my goals, I think this could help some people, is all of my goals are kind of low resolution, I like to say, where I got a bearing that I want to be headed on. I don't know exactly what the path is going to look like. I don't even know what the end goal is going to look like, but um, that's taken me really far, just having a basic concept of where I want to go, and just going with the flow, kind of riding the waves. And that doesn't mean sit on your hands and do nothing and wait for the world to bring it to you, but because I think that's the worst thing you could do most of the time. But it more just, I've always found really good luck in just trudging forward. And if it doesn't go as exactly how you wanted it to go, all you can do is continue to trudge, and you may end up in somewhere completely different. But if 10 years ago, if you would ask me if my life looks like what it looks like now, I wouldn't have. There's no way I would have believed you. No, I would have had no concept of, and hadn't even crossed my mind to travel the world at that point, or do any of the things that I've done. And so that wasn't my goal 10 years ago. I think where I ended up is far better what my goal was 10 years ago. So it doesn't always work out, but if you just roll with it, I think life can be pretty dang cool where it takes you.
Keep moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
Having traveled all over the world and lived with all these other cultures and immersed yourself in them, how's that changed your outlook on what it means to be an American and in our American way of life?
Oh, that's a good one. Um, it, I guess it's made me less prideful about being American, but it's also given me a great respect for what America means to the world. I mean, that America absolutely is like a shining beacon to a lot of people, as far as freedom, or that idea of the American dream. Just being able to have the opportunity to make something out of yourself, because a lot of people in other countries don't have that. There's circumstances that prevent it. And so um, it's made me have a lot more respect. I mean, obviously that's preached to you here since you're young, that we are that, but it's a lot different seeing that, and seeing people can tell, or you can just see in the way that, I've seen in the way that people's eyes just kind of light up when they find out you're American. They have some ridiculous preconceived notions of what an American is, but also a lot of it is they just have a lot of questions, and you can see a lot of times, that these people, uh, would greatly envy me just because I'm American. Like they would give anything for the chance to live in the United States and have the opportunity that people do here. So that has I don't know that that was necessarily a new idea that occurred to me when I was traveling, but it was absolutely solidified and after seeing and talking to these people.
Is there something you wish that those of us that are here and have never really been anywhere else, is there something that you wish that we could know or appreciate?
I think if more people did appreciate just how much opportunity is here, the thing is, I've also completely come to the realization that that is that's completely foolish to for me to expect people that live here that have not seen the things that I've seen to expect them to be able to just adopt my way of thinking or the perspective I have. There's no way, and I mean, even the book, I hope it sheds some light on that for people. But um, I'm not judgmental of people that don't get it. I've worked around. I work out in California sometimes, or down in Texas, and you get around these really wealthy people, especially like generational wealth people that just really have no concept of how good they have it. And at first that was pretty appalling to me, pretty disgusting that like these people couldn't wrap their head around um, just how good they had it. But the more I thought about it, how would they? Uh, it's not necessarily their fault that they, came up that way, or even if you're not incredibly wealthy or born into generational wealth, just, if you've ranched in Montana your whole life, I don't expect you to fully comprehend what it does to your soul talking to these people in Africa about finances or the meaning of life or whatever. So I guess if there was something that I wish people understood, it would just be the fact that we have so much opportunity, and um, our lives are really good here and really safe, and we have our own problems, but a lot of times, we have a pretty good set of problems to have. Um, but yeah, I guess to whatever capacity that people could comprehend that, we have it really good here.
Well, I think some of what I'm pulling from what you just said is that it's really important to get out of our own bubble and go see some other things. To the extent that we can afford to, it's important to see how other people live so that we can appreciate the lives that we have. Would that be a fair assessment of, one of the things you're trying to say?
Yes, no, you hit the nail on the head, and I guess to expand on that, I don't ever try to encourage people to go do what I did, because I don't if I did it again, I don't know if I would come back alive. If somebody else did it, I don't know if they would come back alive. So I would never encourage somebody to go to the extreme that I did, but I absolutely encourage people as much as possible to get outside of their comfort zone, however big that or small that may be. You don't need to go to Mongolia and disappear into the wilderness for 2 months to come to a life changing realization. So I mean, you could, if you live in Wyoming, maybe that just means take a trip to Arizona and see how those cowpunchers down there do it. Talk to some people with a different state of mind, or maybe that doesn't mean you even leave the state, but you at least take some time off to go um, hang out with your kids, or go on a little trip with your wife or girlfriend or whoever, because I know people that's incredibly uncomfortable for them to leave the ranch. They're worried about water breaking and who's feeding cows and this and that. And if that takes you outside of your comfort zone to take a weekend off and leave, then do that. I mean, that is just as good for you as going to Africa without a cell phone and living there for 6 months. You can still learn a lot.
Yeah. I really have a passion for young folks and I want to see them be successful. And a couple years ago, I wrote a post on Facebook and basically just said one of the best things that I ever did in my life was leaving home to go to college, moving somewhere else outside of my hometown. And I talked about how valuable that was and how it opened some doors for me and allowed me to appreciate what I'd had because I'd never known anything different. Allowed me to help grow into who I am as an individual, where if you never leave your bubble, who you are is just kind of a reflection of everybody that you've ever been around and every way of thinking that you've ever been exposed to. So if you can expand that bubble, you can increase your knowledge, your wisdom, and your opportunities. And for young folks, I really suggest before you get, like as you've alluded to earlier, before you get any sort of those commitments that could tie you down, like family, if you have an opportunity to go work somewhere else or go live somewhere else, even if it's scary to think about living in a different state or even a different country, try it. Because in my own experience, everything that I've ever done that initially I was scared of at first, and that doesn't matter if it's going somewhere or taking on a new challenge of a job. If I was nervous and scared about it and thought about not doing it, but I went ahead anyway, it's always been a great decision. It's always worked out to be something that was really powerful in my life. So, just to go along with what JB's talking about, those of you that are listening, if you have a chance to get out of your bubble, do it. What are some observations you've made in all of your travels about the different types of, democracy, republic, communism?
Well, so I will preface this by saying I have never really been a student of government anywhere that I went. So my observations are exclusively social and what I gathered from talking to people. I never looked into it that deeply, but um, I think it depends on what sort of. I think everybody's in some way pursuing freedom um, or opportunity, and different forms of government maybe let it thrive in different ways. Um, as an example, in Sweden, um, they're almost socialist. I don't know if they're truly socialist, but it's close to that. And so the government, I mean, they take a lot of their money for taxes and stuff like that. Also, a lot of things are paid for free, and that country is very safe because of it, and you get a lot of opportunity to kind of do what you want in some respects because yeah, I don't know if they've done this. They were when I was there, they were talking about doing like a citizen salary where every citizen gets 1,000 or 1,500 bucks a month, and in doing that, they hoped that more people would get more free time to go do things they enjoy, to paint or to I don't know cycle or work with your horses or whatever you want to do. So in some ways, there's a lot more freedom in a country like that because you're taken care of and there's a safety net. But then you go to the other end of the spectrum in countries like Africa or Mongolia, and there's no government and there's nobody coming to save you. But there's also a lot of freedom in that as well because you are in charge of yourself and you are in charge of everything that you feel like creating. So you could do whatever you want in those countries, but you better have your gun ready when the neighbor feels like doing whatever he wants. And so I guess it just depends on where you fall on that spectrum of things. I mean, it depends on how much you value security and safety, how much you actually value freedom. Some people maybe don't value that all that much, and what you're looking for out of life. But I mean, I think there's a lot of happy people in Sweden. I think we're taught and kind of we always talk about socialism being bad, and I think, I mean, I wouldn't want to live there, but um, there's a lot of good things that that country has going for it because of that. And then there's also, like in Argentina, I believe technically they're classified still as a democracy, but that country is so corrupt that the people in power just buy the elections, and then once they're in power, they stay there, and a lot of horrible things happen because of that. So I, I guess I don't really know what's the right way to do it, or I mean, again, America has it pretty dang good. You kind of get the middle of the road on that stuff here, where you have some government involvement, but you also have a lot of freedoms depending on where you live to go do what you want, to go earn the money that you want. So yeah, I guess I don't know. I don't. All of my insight is just observational from a strictly civilian standpoint.
Well, JB, we kind of need to start wrapping this up because we could go on all night. So, to kind of conclude this interview and this podcast, uh, I'd like to know what's next for you. You and I had visited a little while back, and you were talking about Hawaii of all places. So, did anything come of that, or what's next?
Well, yeah, Hawaii is on my list. I was planning on actually being in Hawaii right now, and then some stuff came up where I wasn't. It didn't all work out because I was planning it on a little bit short notice, and um, that didn't really work for the folks that were in Hawaii. So um, I will be going to Hawaii in the future. Big, kind of bigger travels. I think I'll probably go back to Argentina again fairly soon. That's the first place I'd like to revisit that I've been to before, because when I was there the first time, my Spanish was terrible. I was there to learn Spanish, and I never got very good at it. And my Spanish is considerably better now. So I'd like to go back and be able to communicate a little bit better down there. But as far as new travels, the top of my list right now is Tibet, or sorry, not Tibet, Nepal. I don't think I can go to Tibet, but Nepal, they run cattle up at, I guess they're yaks, but they run them up at 15, 16,000 feet. And here where I'm at in Wyoming, on my grandpa's place there, he specializes in raising high altitude bulls because uh, cattle, European breeds of cattle don't do very well at high altitude, and it's really only a problem we deal with here in the Rockies. The rest of the U.S. it doesn't really have to deal with that, but I've always found that high altitude cattle very interesting. So I'd like to go over there and see what those folks do. Um, I guess more short term. I'm about to tomorrow morning. First thing, I'm going to leave on make a big circle through Utah, Nevada, California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas, and then go back up through Colorado, back here to Wyoming. I'm going to go shoot a bunch of music videos, try and check out some ranches in the Southwest. I haven't spent a lot of time down there on ranches, and so I've got a few friends down there. I'd like to go just see how they do things and day work around Texas and shoot a bunch of music with some new artists and some returning artists, and that'll be probably the next couple months of my life at least.
Awesome. What part of Texas?
I'll probably be all over. I do have I've got a book signing. Uh, it's the only one I have planned right now, but it's happening at South by Southwest um, in Austin, and that I believe is the 15th of March. So I'll be right there in kind of central Texas. That's one of my favorite parts of Texas, is that the hill country right there. But I'll be in Fort Worth. I'll be probably spending a lot of time in New Braunfels. I'll probably head over kind of by um, San Angelo. Got a really good friend over there that I might go visit. He's got a a ranch out that way. I don't know. We'll just see where the wind blows me while I'm down there.
Yeah, I need to get back to Texas. I lived down there for a while. I worked in Matador, Texas, so kind of at the bottom of the panhandle. And then a few years ago, Cimarron Firearms Company flew me down to Fredericksburg in the hill country. And that was my first time being in the hill country. And it's beautiful. I'd really love to
Hmm.
explore a little bit more of that country. Where can people connect with you? You have a book called The Lost Cowboy.
Hmm.
What else do they need to look up, or how can they connect with you about the book and purchase the book?
So I like I said, I've been trying to do some book signings. I'll probably do some more this coming summer. Um, but I don't have those planned yet. So you can buy a book if you keep up with me at those. But the book is also on Amazon. That's the quickest and easiest way to get the book is go on Amazon and just search The Lost Cowboy. It should pop right up. Um, the audio book just recently came out. I guess that was in December that it came out. My friend Devin Riley read that book. He did a really good job. I didn't read it myself, so he did it. Coulter Wall, he wrote the foreword to the book, and then he also read his foreword in the audiobook, so he was a little part of that as well. That you can find on Amazon. It's also on Audible, so you can listen to the book there. As far as socials and stuff go, I'm pretty much only active on Instagram. It's at the Lost Cowboy. The spaces are periods, if that makes sense. I guess you could put it in the show notes or something so they get
Yep.
it right. But the Lost Cowboy on Instagram. I also Lost Cowboy on Facebook. Um, if you have any interest in the music stuff that I put out, that's called Dusty Vaquero, and that's at Dusty Vaquero on Instagram. Same on Facebook. And I've got my website is thelostcowboy.com. You can find link to the book and all that stuff on there too. I also sell right now. I only have hats. I've got a few different styles of hats, both for the Lost Cowboy and Dusty Vaquero. I'm working on an online store right now. It's not up yet. So if you would like a hat, you can shoot me a message on Instagram or Facebook, and or you can contact me through my website as well. And I just ship those myself. I keep a bunch of hats and boxes in my van and pull over on the side of the road and stuff your hat in the box and ship it at the first post office that I come to. So um, I've got those, and then I'll have an online store working on getting some like shirts and sweatshirts and stuff like that made, and we'll streamline it a little bit. But for right now, I'm shipping everything out of my
Well, that's customer service.
van.
Well, JB, it's been an absolute pleasure. We're going to record some bonus content now. I'm just going to conclude this part of the show by saying, JB, it's been a real honor to have you on the show. My show's new, and I'm still learning how to do this, but you've been a very gracious guest, and you're very well versed in your communication. I really appreciate that, and I just appreciate you dedicating 3 hours of your time to have a conversation with somebody you've never met.
Oh, well, I'm glad you wanted to talk with me. I think this podcast you got going is a really cool idea.
All right, Living Western Podcast, Episode 3 with JB Zielke, bonus content. This is kind of a funny question now, given that I'm talking to you. If money were no object, where would you want to live? Where would you want to call home?
Oh, Wyoming. That's if money wasn't a thing, I'd want to live in Wyoming. But a close second to that would be Argentina.
What part of Wyoming?
Right where I live in the Platte River Valley, southern Carbon County, and I just love the mountains there.
Well, I lived in Casper for a couple years while I was going to college, and then I also lived. I guess Sheridan was my hometown for a while when I worked for the Padlock.
I like Saratoga where I'm at, but Sheridan 100% is second.
What is your favorite type of vehicle?
Yeah, well, I guess my minivan. I roll around in a Dodge Caravan. I've mostly owned Dodges. I've when I had diesel pickups, they were all Dodges. I don't own any of them now, but now I just roll around in a Dodge Caravan. That's my house, and yeah, I think minivans are severely underrated, and more people should have them. I know a couple guys that shoe horses out of them, and they love them.
Well, I grew up in them, and I mean, I get the stigma, but man, they are a handy rig. How old is it, and how many miles you got on it?
My van is a 2013, and I haven't even owned it a year yet. I bought it off of a grandma who took fairly good care of it. I think I just did the oil change. I think it's got 175,000 miles on it. It had a it had a 125,000 when I bought it 9 or 10 months ago.
Still going strong.
Yeah, I put 50,000 miles on it in since last May.
What's your favorite music?
My favorite, I really like the old cowboy music and storytelling, but because I love it, and I've kind of made a business out of being around that. Because of that, because I spend so much time listening to it and editing it and analyzing it and all that stuff. When I get in my minivan and I have to drive across the country, I turn on rap music and I listen to J. Cole and Logic.
What is your favorite meal?
Probably Milanesa in Argentina is where I learned about it. It's just a really thin steak. I guess I don't even know what cut it is. It might be flank steak, but it's very thin and then it's breaded and fried. It's kind of like a chicken fried steak almost, but I learned that a lot of Mexicans eat it too, but I learned about it in Argentina. But it's very simple, very easy to make, and that's probably my favorite meal.
Here's another one that's a little bit interesting because of the person we're talking to. What is your favorite vacation destination?
The only place I've ever actually gone for a vacation where I wasn't bumming around trying to do work and stuff is Playa del Carmen, which is just south of Cancun, or Cozumel. It's the mainland right by that Cozumel island. Um, I really like it down there. It's just very peaceful, and that you can. It's one of the best places in the world to scuba dive. I don't know how to scuba dive, but I've snorkeled and stuff a lot down there. So as far as just relaxing and vacation, I really like that. Just the whole Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico is really cool.
Have you ever been to Hawaii yet?
I haven't. That might take the cake if I been there.
You know, I never ever dreamed of going to Hawaii, but after we got married, my in-laws sent us several months later to Hawaii for our honeymoon, and the, I've I've never been around many oceans or anything, but on the Big Island there, on a beach in the sunshine, the waves hitting about 80, not too hot. I tell you what, I've probably never been more at just peace physically and mentally than right there on that beach. And the cool thing about the Big Island is that there's so much ranching going on. One of the world's biggest ranches is right there on the Big Island, the Parker Ranch. So as you're
Hmm.
going across this island that also has like 10 different climate zones on it, if you get bored with one, just drive 10 miles. Um, Driving across like over towards Waimea, and it just opens up in huge big grasslands. You see a mountain in the distance and trees. And gosh, I told my wife when we got to Waimea, I was like, if money was no object, I could live here, even though it's on an island.
Hmm.
So I'm looking forward to your
I
reaction to
believe.
Hawaii. What is your favorite Western TV show or movie?
Oh, Lonesome Dove for sure. I've watched that movie more than any other movie, specifically because of how it's cut up. That being four parts, if you cut them in half, you can get through almost an entire night of night calving if you just cut each episode in half. And you can go out and make your checks every hour. And by the time the movie's over, you're about done with your shift. But I love that movie.
I've heard a lot of reasons for cowboys loving Lonesome Dove, but nobody's ever told me that one of the primary reasons is for the scheduling around their night calving job. That's awesome. And this one can be kind of tough for people who have been in the rodeo world. But who's your favorite rodeo athlete of all time?
It's probably a tie between Casey Tibbs and Ty Murray. Casey Tibbs was obviously way before my time, and um, but I grew up watching Ty Murray on TV and stuff, and he was the guy that I definitely looked up to, especially because I mean even now I look up to him because he's just how he lives his life, and he's you don't really see a lot of guys like that are really good at like almost everything. I guess now we've got these right boys that are kind of in that realm. But as a little kid growing up, that was pretty cool to watch to see a roughie win all around. Um, but Casey Tibbs was really cool because just from the stories I've read and stuff, he was you know rodeo cowboys at that time were they're just ranch hands that were going into town and competing, and he was like the first of the kind of rock star, um, more outlaw kind of rodeo cowboy that you. Not all of them are that way today, but it's more common today. And so I, plus he, him winning the world as whatever he was, 17, 18, pretty dang cool. But I guess I just have less of a
Yeah.
connection there because I watched Ty Murray so much growing up.
Well, those are good ones. Casey Tibbs, it's interesting. A lot of the people that, think Casey Tibbs is awesome, let's say from older generations, really struggle with Rocker Steiner
Mm-hmm.
as far as like respecting his personality and stuff. But Casey Tibbs was that generation's Rocker Steiner.
100%. Yeah. I went to the NFR this year and I got to go to a perf for the first time. I've been before, but never got to go to a rodeo. And I was sitting pretty high up. I think I want to say it was the seventh round that I was at. And Rocker came out, and there was an old couple sitting next to me, and I couldn't tell. It got loud in there when Rocker busted out of the chutes, and but I thought I could hear these folks saying dirt or something about the dirt, and I wasn't paying that close attention, and um, I think Rocker made his ride, but it didn't put him in first, and then the end of the bareback riding came up, and this guy leans over to his wife and he says, "Well, at least Rocker didn't win it." And I remember sitting there thinking, I don't remember the last time I've been around rodeo most of my life, and I have never seen people cheer against a rodeo athlete. Obviously, plenty of people cheer for a specific athlete to win, but I realized these people were screaming for him to hit the dirt. They wanted to see him get bucked off, and I couldn't really believe that people would cheer against somebody or want to see somebody fall off or get hurt because it's. I mean to me that's never been rodeo. It's always everybody always cheers for everybody, and of course you have a favorite, but um, that was pretty surprising. I think Rocker's great, so I don't know why people are like that.
Well, it's a different culture. He's got a different attitude, and his values may not be what the older generations have, and I mean I can identify with that a little bit. Some of the stuff I yeah, like, come on, man. But you also got Larry Mahan was his generation's Rocker Steiner. Um, I try to look at it as, you know what, these guys are appealing to a whole different crowd than the normal
Hmm.
crowd that I grew up with. The the people that like to watch Yellowstone, you know, I'm not a huge Yellowstone fan. It's way too foul and you know, but it's provided an awareness to millions of people to the cowboy life and ranching culture that we traditional rural conservative people would never reach. We would never connect with those
Hmm.
people. Rocker connects with a crowd and brings their interest into rodeo and cowboys that otherwise probably wouldn't even care. So, you know, while I may not agree with everything he does, I'm tickled pink that he's just kicking butt and having fun and, you know, sparking an interest.
Hmm.
This one's a little deeper. Who has been your biggest hero in life?
Maybe like Hunter S. Thompson, um, or I don't. I have a hard time with heroes or the idea of them because I think you can see heroic things from very normal people all the time, and I've also had the opportunity to meet um, a lot of people that a lot of people idolize now, and you get to meet these famous people, well-known people, and they're not bad people, but they are people, and so it's you start to meet people that maybe once were your idols or heroes, and you realize that they're just people, and for me, it really shifted the way that I look at all that stuff because it's no matter who I say, I in my own mind know that that was just a person, especially if it's like a famous person, somebody like Hunter S. Thompson or something like that. So I mean, I find I like I think my grandpa, he's probably taught me more than anybody else about life. And like I said before, he's not even my real grandpa. I just consider him a grandpa to me. Um, but I think he's a hero to me because just of a lot of things he's accomplished in life and you know the way he handles things. There's a lot of things I look up to about him.
Honestly, that's what a real hero is. Is somebody that means a lot to you that you can look up to despite the fact that he's a human and makes mistakes and has flaws. That's a big difference between an idol and a hero. So that's perfect. And it's funny that you bring up Hunter S. Thompson because when I was reading this book, I was having like visions of Hunter S. Thompson and Matthew McConaughey's book, Greenlights. There's some weird correlate. I mean, you're like the cowboy version of the similar type of writing style.
I appreciate that. I think it's yeah, I think it's a cool, you know, what do they call it? Gonzo journalism. I think that's just a
Yeah.
um, you know, immersing yourself in something to understand it. I think is really cool.
Well, your book is very much like a journal, but it's written in such a way that whoever's reading it is living your journal, like in their mind. So, um, yeah, it's just funny that you brought up Hunter S. Thompson because that was one of two names I thought of when I was reading this. On the book note, what is the best book you have read recently?
um, right right now I'm reading a book called Breathe. I can't remember the guy's name who wrote it, but um, it was just given to me by a friend recently, and it was actually suggested to me originally by Shane Smith from Shane Smith and the Saints. I ran into him in Steamboat, and just a very random conversation that we had where he talked about how some of the stuff from this book had changed the way that he sings, and he's had some vocal issues, and they were telling him that he was going to need vocal surgery fairly soon if he didn't change up some of the things he was doing. And he did a few things, but just this book, it's been very interesting to read about how much breath affects our everyday life and well-being. Um, but it is it's kind of a weird book. There's some of the books that I go back and reread is um, The War of Art was a big one. That's a short book, but it's incredibly helpful to me, and I've given it to a lot of my artist friends because it could help anybody in any line of work, but it's specifically written towards artists about how to approach your work and be a professional about it. Um, we pointed them north. That was the writing style in my book was basically came from that book. I read that years ago, and I remember thinking how interesting that was. That basically, I can't remember the woman's name that sat down, but she had the foresight to see that Teddy Blue Abbott was one of the last living cowboys that had actually come up the trail from Texas, and to sit down and write down his stories. When I was writing my book, I kept that in mind that I wanted it to almost be like to feel like you were sitting there at dinner or at a bar with me and me just telling you stories about that's how I wanted it to feel. And so I wrote it specifically because of we pointed them north. Um, so that's a great one. I read a lot of books. There's a bunch of them that I've got a lot of knowledge from.
And the last question: what is the most impactful advice anyone ever gave you?
My grandpa told me that his dad told him this, but he told him that it's better to wear out than to rust out, and that's something that I've never forgotten, I guess, because I'm not old, but there's still things that I do in everyday life that I think, I remind myself that you can't just let yourself atrophy and go go to nothing. So I think it's better to wear out than rust out. And that story, he was telling me that because there's been a few instances in my life where I've known um, old cowboys that uh, as soon as they quit working, they died, and um, they I've seen that firsthand, and so that was the context that he was telling me, and where my grandpa's 75 or 6. His health isn't great, but he's still out there working on the ranch every day, and I assume he will until he absolutely cannot anymore. Um, so I have a lot of respect for that.
Well, that is it for this podcast. We are, let me see, where's my clock at? 3 hours and 18 minutes. So it's been a marathon. JB, again, I just want to thank
Yeah.
you for taking the time to do this with me and, give your name to to a brand new podcast and somebody that you've never been around. So I have a lot of respect for you. I really enjoyed your book, and I'm looking forward to seeing where you go in the future.
Well, I appreciate it. I'm very happy that you asked me to be on. And if people like this one and you want to do a part two, I'm more than happy to do that.
This concludes part 3 of episode 3 with JB Zielke, author of The Lost Cowboy. This is the final part of that conversation. I got a lot out of this entire episode, but one of the things that I'm still kind of trying to wrap my mind around is people's different perspectives of freedom around the world, and how I need to be careful that I don't get caught up in, well, I'm an American, this is the United States, so it's just the best way. Just because we're American doesn't mean we're best. Just because we're American doesn't mean we're right. Now, I'm not saying we're not. I love this country with all of my heart, and I would die for her. But I do think we need to be careful that we're not arrogant and just assuming that because we're American, we're right. In the Bible, it talks about pride goeth before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall. If we're really honest with ourselves, our pride is getting a little carried away. And what I don't want to see is us get proud and complacent and just assume that we have everything figured out as Americans. Because we don't. I think it's probably wise for us to open our minds a little bit, consider that maybe we have some things to work out. Maybe there's some different ways of doing things other than what we've always known and what we've always felt is the right way to do things. So if I took anything from this last episode, it's that I need to be careful. I need to open my mind, be considerate of everyone around me and everybody else's perspectives. Consider that there might be more than one way to be the best country in the world. I really enjoyed this entire conversation. It's one of the best conversations that I've ever had. And I feel blessed that it happens to be recorded for this podcast. If you would like to follow or learn more about our guest, J.B. Zielke, please see the description below for links to his website and his book, The Lost Cowboy, as well as the audiobook. Your support means the world to me, and I would not be doing this if people weren't listening. So thank you. My name is Clayton Markser, and you're listening to Living Western. We'll see you next time.